Our panel discussion is on the Building Safety Act. Please join in with any questions and comments. So this is very much actually following on from John's presentation earlier. We know the Building Safety Act is large and complex. We're going to assume you know the basics. We only have a limited time available, and therefore we're going to limit ourselves to focusing on one key question. How do you procure a facade at Gateway 2? On time, on budget, and all of those other things it needs to do. Sounds quite simple. Clearly, it's not. Various different approaches can be taken. Every project is different. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, as we have already discussed. Furthermore, it's still a relatively new topic. Everyone's learning. We've heard already about submissions being rejected. So we have a panel today made up of some of the key stakeholders in this process, and we're going to explore some of these potential consequences. So hopefully by the time I've introduced our panelists, they will be mic'd up and on stage next to me. Otherwise, it's going to be a slightly odd discussion. First up, we have Paul Savidge. Paul is a chartered facade engineer and managing director of the Wintech Group, a building engineering practice. Wintech is at the forefront of helping their clients with consultancy advice and design detailing for facade refurbishment schemes, and has some very relevant recent experience of providing detailed design information to meet Gateway 2 of the BSA rather. Next up, we have Robert Simcock. Robert has built and leads the national facade team at Sir Robert McAlpine. With almost 30 years curtain wall and cladding experience, he has helped deliver some of the UK's most prestigious landmark buildings. Robert's expertise lies in developing robust strategies and managing large specialist teams for delivering them. And finally, Terje Vallestad from Permasteelisa. Terje is a registered European engineer, an SFE fellow and board member. He has over 40 years of experience in construction and over 30 years experience of London facade projects. He's currently interim operations director at Permasteelisa UK and has covered this and many other roles within the group over the past 20 years. Recently, he set up a series of internal courses on the Building Safety Act in terms of understanding the duties that this brings. And hopefully, people are going to appear from my right-hand side very shortly. Aha, right. There we go. Yes, they are on their way. Phew. Paul, welcome. Rob and Terje, please welcome our panelists. Ooh. Take a seat. Right. Okay. So this very much follows on from the presentation that John gave us this morning. Hopefully we can put a bit more detail and get some very interesting perspectives. I'm going to start with Rob. You're a main contractor. You need to procure a facade for your next building. What approaches are you seeing to that with the Building Safety Act, obviously, in mind?
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a question on my mind for about 6 months because we're about to start our first Gateway 2 design any minute now. And we had to, I've been thinking about robust strategies for about 6 months, and I formed a strategy. I'm not arrogant to think enough that that's the right strategy, so I went and challenged it to a number of people in this room, actually, clients, consultants, trade contractors, and looked at what field they're in, because we work in a very diverse environment, from small projects, rain screen, up to unitised. You know, we have a very diverse palette of materials we use as well. So I wanted to challenge the robustness of that strategy, and I went full circle and came back, and I was happy that the strategy we'd formed was flexible enough to adopt, you know, their positions. And that strategy was based upon the risk of Sir Robert McAlpine. We're a very low-risk business, and the risk with Gateway 2, failing Gateway 2, is way more than any marginal gains you'll get by, you know, having a smaller facade consultant scope, or which you see quite often, or no fire engineer involved in a process, or no facade contractor involved. So because of that risk relationship, you know, the strategy for me was very clear. It was basically, you know, have your architect in as a principal designer, have a main contractor, but we'd have strict deliverables and milestones for a facade consultant, strict deliverables and milestones for a fire consultant as well, and link those into a facade contractor that's brought in at the same stage very early in the design process. And those deliverables will be matched to the Gateway 2, but also standard PCSA considerations such as V in that process, such as advising the design team and the PQS on costs, because that sometimes drives the design technically as well. The cost, we've got to admit in the industry, cost drives the direction we're going sometimes. So I think that balance worked quite well. Where it's flexible is the fire consultant, and yes, a lot of them, some of them don't understand facades as well as we do, and that needs to be recognised, as well as a lot of facade consultants don't have PI in fire design, as well as trade contractors. A lot of trade contractors actually can't do fire design. So we have to look at the different buildings, and we have to vary that those milestone deliveries depending upon the complexity of the building, depending upon the competency of the different people you have involved. And I think as a result, that strategy is flexible enough to work for most situations.
Okay. Paul, where do you fit into this process? As a key facade consultant, where's your input best placed, do you think?
Thank you, David. I think well, it's certainly an interesting question. From my perspective, I think it really does depend on the complexity of the building that we're looking at. It depends on the chosen procurement strategy that will be adopted downstream. So, I mean, if we think the traditional approach to the facade industry has used over the years has been often to break down the facade into the different subcontract elements, and where we're looking at that process, I can see a huge difficulty with that. We've clearly seen that there's issues with Gateway 2, getting a design through Gateway 2. And I think one of the things that's perhaps incumbent on the industry, on us, is that we need to streamline that application process as much as possible. We may need to make it as easy as possible for the assessors for building control to look at the details provided and approve them. And in order to do that, what I think we really do need to do is provide a consolidated design. So rather than a separate series of design packages coming through, there needs to be one single design pack for the facade. Now, of course, that would then tend to lead itself towards having a consultant involved or a lead design for the facade elements to provide that coordination role, working with the facade contractors to put the thing together. And I think I should say that where we've got a single envelope contractor, perhaps that role could be taken by the single envelope contractor. Where we've got a high-spec, unitized project, then you've got a single design responsibility for the facade. So that changes. But if we're looking perhaps towards the more common elements of construction, sort of student residence, hospitals, this type of thing, then getting that collaborative input from the consultant, I think, would be really, really useful.
So tying all of those different elements together to give, as you said, a comprehensive, cohesive.
Absolutely.
Or that could be built.
Yeah, or even perhaps even doing the design in certain circumstances if appropriate. But I have to say, I think I do see issues with the approach as well. That if we design materials way in advance of the actual construction of the building, it could be 2 years, those materials might not be available anymore. We might be locking in price difficulties for the contractor, because as soon as the supply chain know that their products have been incorporated in the design, and to get those products changed to a different product, there's an 8-week delay through the change control procedures. It does tend to complicate the whole thing.
I think that's an interesting point that I think if we have time, we'll come back to shortly. Terje, where do you fit into this? Obviously, you are involved in a particular type of facade and a particular type of building. How do you see this process affecting what you do? Where do you think you should be involved?
I think we are involved in all sorts of buildings in general, but of course, unitized, high-class unitized curtain walling is our forte. What I think needs to happen, will probably evolve, is to include the subcontractor or the cladding contractor, facade contractor earlier in the process, because the risk of not passing Gateway 2, and we're talking now specifically on Gateway 2, is huge. And program effect of that is going to just run on, and then if you then get into the changes, or that you have to make changes later, then you lose your other 6 to 8 weeks or something. So from our perspective, I think we need to be on board with the client and the main contractor or the principal contractor early, because this, and of course with the facade consultants. You look at the what is termed like major changes and so on. The bar there is very low, in my opinion, and so you're talking about wall ties and stuff like that, which is translated to curtain walls would be like bracketry and so on, and you wouldn't normally have all your bracketry for every location and building designed at the start of the process. So from the traditional design and build, this is a big mountain to climb, I would say, on Gateway 2.
Yeah, and I suppose critical to all of this is the detail. No, we saw on one of John's slides earlier, fully developed design at Gateway 2. What does that mean? It's going to sound a silly question. Is a fully developed design one that is absolutely completed down to the last nut, bolt, and washer? Is it something that's 90% there with a bit of scope? What level of detail do you think is needed?
Well, I can't say what is needed, but I can give you the benefit of the experience where we've understood that applications haven't passed, that they've been rejected. We did a concept design drawing for a project in Birmingham. It was just changing the spandrel panel over, so a really simple drawing. We did a really detailed concept drawing, but under the fixing for the spandrel, it had TBA. For the cavity barrier, it had a TBA. But other than that, it was a fully developed detail. Without our knowledge, the client used it to go off and do a Gateway 2 application, and it was rejected straight away because of two critical issues. Structural identification of the fixing wasn't completed. Fire safety, cavity barrier product wasn't identified. And on the basis of those two, it was rejected. So
they wanted to see a specific product.
Yes.
In that, okay.
The fixing identified.
Yep.
To give you further examples, we've had a request for a pull-out calculation for cavity barrier fixings.
Okay. Right.
We've had requests to identify door handle heights, window heights to demonstrate compliance with Part M. So our understanding is that the design that needs to be submitted is perhaps more detailed than is commonly done already.
Before I get on to Rob and Terje, just on that last one where you had TBA on that drawing,
Yep.
Do you think if that hadn't been identified, so if there was nothing pointed at that fixing, it would have got through?
I couldn't.
I'm not suggesting people don't do that, but did you draw attention to it by having TBA on there?
Perhaps, yes, but I think this is setting the flavour.
Yeah, I'd say I'm not suggesting this is what we should be doing. Just, yeah.
It would almost be, I did think, you might be better off if you hadn't put the drawing in.
Yeah.
Just put a narrative. But if you're going to put drawings in, they need to be fully detailed. They need to identify products, fixings. Yeah. They need to be backed up with calculations. They also need a narrative. A report needs to be provided to explain why these details actually meet building regulation requirements, cross-referenced. So it's a complex job. Yeah.
Rob and Terje, is that your experience as well? It really is down to the last nut, bolt and washer?
I think so. I think it comes back to strategy and, the opening question. How you analyse that building and how you strategise how you're going to procure those services is unbelievably important. And, I would definitely, as a minimum, ask for a system design from the trade contractor and that be supported by the consultant, the fire consultant, the facade engineer, and the architect. And the system design should pick up each wall type. It should pick up in detail, naming products. And they're the products that the supply chain wants to use because they've got strategic partnerships out there, buying gains again. We are in a commercial world. But they're naming products and they're proving those products work for each wall type under a system type design. So system type design backed up by building physics.
Terje, agree? That's the level of detail you're going to be submitting?
At the moment, we haven't done any, so I really don't know what the level of detail will be required. I expect it to be quite detailed, And if you're looking at where we are in the industry at the moment, you can see that I did a little sort of poll survey a week ago where we had some people together. And in London, TRA, contractors and consultancies, there are basically nobody who has got anything past a gateway 2. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is. Everybody is still learning, and we I guess have to try and, as you said, set that bar. Going back to the point you made before about change. If you're having to specify a specific product, what happens if that product is no longer available or not available in the required time frame? And actually, I had an inquiry from a CWCT member yesterday, actually asking the exact same question. Would it be appropriate to use an equivalent product that matches the performance of the specified product, but is different? And I said, I haven't got time to talk to him now, I'll talk to him another time. Not trying to deflect it at all. But yeah, it's a serious issue. How do you deal with change? Because inevitably there will be some change between what's designed to what is constructed, particularly if that process takes a long time. How are you proposing to deal with, or how do you think that can be managed?
Well, you have to make proposals for what what the change is going to be. What you're taking this and you're doing something else. And now it depends on what is this change. Is that a major change, or is it not? If it's a major change, it has to go back for approval, and now you have to wait for 6 weeks minimum to get it approved. And during that period, you cannot do anything. And I'm not clear on whether you cannot do anything for that specific area or whatever is influenced by the change, or wider part of the building that may or could be influenced by this change, as a follow-on activity.
So is one solution to specify 2 different products, for example, as part of that submission, so you sort of have a backup?
Yeah, I've had conflicting advice on this. One principal designer suggested that you shouldn't do that by listing different products, it may confuse building control, it may suggest that you haven't got confidence in one particular product. And their advice on one submission, which was generally received very, very well by the building safety regulator, was just single product. I had a chat to a building control officer just yesterday, and their view was that no, it's entirely reasonable to put alternative products where those products don't change the design. So maybe it's different membranes, a different membrane might be appropriate. But if we're talking about a different window system that then might change actual setting out or something a bit more substantial, then I think that might be more problematic. So
if you're just offering an alternative fixing, for example, that would seem to be a reasonable way. Approach.
There is one other aspect perhaps to discuss on this point as well, and that is where the applications we've done so far relate to facade refurbishment projects. And often where you're doing a facade refurbishment, there might be an area of cladding that needs to be stripped and you don't necessarily know what's behind it. So if the bracket depth has to change, that in theory is a structural change. Structural change is a major change, 8-week delay. So our approach has been to put in a anticipated detail and then put alternative details in that might cover the different ranges. So we've already got those alternatives included within the original submission. But I guess the chances are when you open it up, you'll find something totally different anyway.
How do you think you might approach that, Rob?
There's going to be change. We're in construction. It's how we manage change is sort of the quality of the company you're dealing with and your strategy. So it's all about minimising change, not getting rid of it. You can't get rid of it. It's about minimising the larger items. So we'd look at in that PCSA process, different VE options and drill them down and get decisions made, but get them made robustly. And if you've got the facade contractor on board, they can drive that design in maybe a different direction that's associated with a cost that can get signed off earlier. So the design doesn't head in the wrong direction, and therefore you end up with a change. So I think it's all about minimising that change in that strategy. I think that's really important. Maybe some alternatives, that's great, but I think try and show the building regulator that you've got a competent and joined up design and design team that's coordinated, and give them that relationship. We talked about relationships earlier. Give them that security that you're heading in the right direction. And if you have got some different products you want to offer, it's a solid, robust offering, not just an afterthought.
Yeah. Again, coming back to a previous point, I guess this whole process is more straightforward if you have a single facade contractor involved.
Possibly.
On the sort of the higher end projects that we all like to see pretty pictures of, the reality is most projects aren't like that. So how is this dealt with where you have split packages, multiple contractors involved? It adds an additional layer of complexity to everything, whether it's the design, the change control process, just managing it. How do you envisage that working? Or again, is this where we need good consultants coming in to coordinate that design, or actually just to do that design?
Yeah, challenge and coordinate. So a good example is where you have a typical healthcare job, punch windows, SFS, handset brick. So it always goes that way. But it could be, the problem with that is we've got a window person, an SFS person, and a brick person. The brick person always gets saddled with everything after the breather membrane. They get the insulation, they get the cavity barriers, and then they get the brick. But they don't generally give us very good submittals. They're a bricklaying company. So that's where the consultant would really help out. They would do a joined-up thermal analysis and structural analysis of the complete facade. But we would reduce that risk, as we talked about risk earlier on. We would reduce that risk by trying to buy the SFS and the windows off one business if we can, to give an airtight line. But we've still got the problem of who takes responsibility for the overall performance of that build-up. Whereas if you flip it to a brick slip, you then can go to one company potentially. So, but it doesn't always work for the cost plan or different situations. So this is where the different stakeholders we talked about earlier on will work together and have variable deliverables.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Oh, I'm not sure if I want to get into this question, but I'm going to go for it anyway. Where does the blame lie if it goes wrong? So if a... Thank you, Terje. So we have a Gateway 2 application done to best endeavours, is submitted and is rejected for whatever reason. Now that can have serious consequences in terms of the whole viability of the scheme. If the funding is real issues, are we going to see legal cases where people are potentially sued because of an application that's failed? Are we going to head there, do you think?
If I can ask you an answer, yes, I would think that whether they become legal cases, but there will certainly be many legal wranglings about that. Because it will have huge commercial financial effect, So if something fails, and it can be pinpointed on a contractor or whoever it is, the consultants for that matter, the clients tend to go after, and recover. Mainly as it is at the moment with how insurance and contracts in general and basically financial standing, normally the contractors are those who are able to cover these kind of issues. I think insurance hasn't been discussed much, I think, but I think it will have impact on this, because to find an insurance company who's going to insure you for the risk you're taking by the project being delayed by you don't get past Gateway 2, I think this can be very, very significant, because when you've done the first one, you lose maybe 12 or maybe it was 26 weeks or something like that, and then there's going to be another 26 weeks. That's a year lost on a project and cost a lot of money.
In your production slot,
that's gone.
You might lose it.
Yeah.
So how might you protect yourself?
Well, I think it very much comes down to the terms and conditions of what you agree as part of the contract negotiations, if you take responsibility for delivering a design by a certain date, then you're on the hook for this. Even worse, if you take design for seeing that the building safety regulator approves your submission first time, even worse. So from a consultant's perspective, bearing in mind that professional indemnity insurance will not pay for penalties. It'll pay for professional negligence, but you can't pay for penalties. So typically liquidated damages, you wouldn't be covered for that, so you couldn't take liability for it. So my suggestion would be for any of our projects, that you would work towards a programme, but you couldn't have an obligation to see that it was met. You'd have to rule that out. It was just too much risk otherwise.
Yeah.
A developer I was speaking to last week, I think in their project, they were anticipating costs in the order, and I don't know if this is lost revenue or interest, but costs in the order of £70,000 per week. Now, if you've just got the 8-week delay just from the change control, that's £500,000 just on one change. The way this almost should be is that I think that we need to perhaps have a bit of a rethink of how we cost and finance buildings, and perhaps have a step back and say, let's get the design done first. Let's get it through building safety regulator at the moment until things have settled down, and then we'll start the program. We'll start the clock ticking. Because
that also
too much
has an impact. Sorry, that also has an impact on the program, because you basically are then spending the time up front. Because what the projects are benefiting from at the moment is the design and build, where you are designing as you're building. That for HRBs is not really well. That will be very difficult to do. So therefore, all of those design parts will have to take part before you apply, and that is a part of the program, the overall program from start to end of a project. So the client needs to include for it up front, and I think that's where it sits best.
Yeah. Okay. I have more questions, but I'm actually keen to get some questions from the audience. I think this is new for everybody. Everyone's learning. Do you have any questions, any experiences you'd like to share on this process? And yeah, I can see one there. If you can wait for a microphone, that would be great.
Hello. Thank you for the discussion.
Hold it close.
Yeah. You already touched on this slightly, but do you think the current legislative environment has changed the risk profile of construction generally? And what do you think is a good funding model for HRBs? Because I can see investors basically moving their money somewhere else and not taking on the risk of construction altogether.
Any thoughts on that from?
Well, I think you picked up on it. Is the funding model has to change. I don't think it, unless you have a very robust strategy. Keep on talking about strategy. Sorry, you still may fail, and all the knock-on effects. Who's responsible for that? Because if you go into a PCSA, you're not at that point in a fixed price contract. So how can you be responsible for damages and things when you're in a PCSA? So, yeah, but the funding model, the developer has to borrow that money, and that money has interest rates and penalties based upon a very tight program. It's a very difficult question. I think the funding model has to change.
From my perspective, I'm very concerned that the added complications of the new Building Safety Act, the delays that are being caused, just the whole difficulty that the whole industry is facing, it's going to actually prevent new build going ahead for HRB.
And the government have targets to build
a
million homes.
Yeah,
so there's a conflict there, isn't there?
It's two things absolutely fighting against each other. And I mean, I don't know how factual this is, but I was advised by a building control that they'd been instructed by the government to prioritise façade remediation projects. So out of the 250 odd that were submitted, there were a handful of new build projects, but they'd been put to the bottom of the pile. They hadn't even been looked at. So, yeah.
But the other way of looking at it is UK's UK. You know, we love our unique designs in buildings, and we don't tend to repeat buildings, and maybe we should challenge that. You know, once you know, healthcare, we've got 24 healthcare jobs. Every single one's different. Every single one. Why haven't we got 4 designs that we keep on repeating? And if you went through the Gateway 2 process on that design process, once you've done it once or twice on the same design, why can't you keep on repeating that? So maybe we need to challenge not just the funding, but also our principles of design in architecture.
Yeah.
I think absolutely. The other point I was going to make is that the discussion we had on facade testing. So bespoke facades need to test before you go to site, need to test now, apparently, before Gateway 2. How practical is it to do a facade test in the PCSA stage?
Well, it will be a long PCSA test. And it won't be a PCSA. Because I think the contract formatting will have to also to be updated and changed because of the risks. Yeah. And I think perhaps, I don't know if that is happening, but like JCI, if they are looking at this kind of thing in the background as to how do we deal with these things? Because funding model will lead to some form of a contract model being set up. Security needs to be established, and there you are. So I think really the PCSIs, or whatever you're going to call them, will have to become very long.
Yeah, I completely agree with Rob that it's going to drive us towards standard buildings, standard facade systems, lack of architectural imagination, and end up with very regular buildings.
In some sectors, though, that works.
Yeah.
Some sectors.
Yeah.
You know, could be the making of MMC, this, eventually.
Yeah.
On that note, and unfortunately, we probably have to draw this to a close because, again, that clock is flashing at me. But thank you, all of you, for sharing your thoughts. I think, yeah, it is challenging for everybody. It's new. It's a completely new way of doing things. And as you said, Rob, at the end, maybe actually, rather than trying to do what we've always done, or get what we've always done to fit into this new process, actually, maybe we just need to revise it completely and do something different, whether that's more standard buildings or whatever it might be. I guess we will find out over time. But yeah, in the meantime, no, please do share your experiences with us on Gateway 2 applications in particular, because I think it'd be really, really useful to kind of collate those experiences and see where that is getting us. Right, please thank our panelists.